Hi, my name is Rohina Malik, and I am the artistic director of Medina Theatre Collective. And today I am having a conversation with two members of my theater. And I'm so excited to have a conversation with Ronnie and Annalise. About myself, I am a theater artist, mostly a playwright, but also an actor. I focus on solo performance, and I have a one woman play called Unveiled, which deals with Islamophobia. And I become five Muslim women who each tell a story post 9/11, dealing with hate. And I still perform that these days due to the pandemic virtually. But I've been really busy lately with my brand new theater company, which focuses on the Swanasa community, which stands for Southwest Asian or the Middle East, North African, and South Asian. And Ronnie, please tell us about you.
My name is Ronnie Malley. I am a musician, actor, playwright, producer, teacher. I'm also part of the Medina Theatre Collective, and I do a lot of work in theater and in music as well. I produce albums, I perform with several world music groups. We do a lot of things everywhere from India, the Middle East, North Africa, Africa, West Africa, Spain, the Balkans, and Greece. And I'm very excited actually to be working on the next project with Medina Theatre Collective called Scenes from 73 Years, which is very dear and personal to me because it is about Palestine, and my family is Palestinian, and that's my background. My family's from Jerusalem. It's wonderful to be here.
And that is our next project at Medina Theatre Collective. This coming weekend, we're going to be working on it and recording a performance, and Ronnie will be doing the sound design. Annalise, talk to us. Tell us about you.
So exciting. I'll be part of that project too. I'm Annalise Razik. It's so nice to hear people who have multiple slashes like Ronnie, because sometimes I feel like when I tell people the stuff I do, it makes me sound a little bit like a scam artist. Like I'm a storyteller, an actor, and a writer, an improviser, an activist, and a brain surgeon. Um, but no, I do a lot of work in theater. I'm also a singer. It's funny because I sing with a band. I have a love actually of all music, but I love bluegrass music, and my band is an Americana band. So um, I always classified myself as the singing Polish Arab. I come from multicultural background. My mother was Polish, raised Catholic, then converted to Buddhism. My father was a Muslim Palestinian from Ramallah on the West Bank, and my stepfather was Black. So I've got a lot of influences, and so excited to be working with Medina. Just amazing. I can't wait for our work on the play this weekend, and then our whole upcoming season. So
Great, great. For me, one of the reasons I wanted to start Medina Theatre Collective was I wanted us as a community to have an artistic home, a place where if Ronnie is writing a new play, you can come and say, Rohina, I'm writing this brand new play and I need help. Can you set up a roundtable? And we can help in development of new work. I've always felt as someone from the Swanasa community erased. Like we're so often ignored. Um, Even when it comes to just Asia, sometimes the focus is always East or Southeast Asia, and people forget that hey, I'm Asian too, and so is you guys and Palestinians. That this all falls into Asia. So I think like often, and it started for me even in high school because growing up in London, I identified as Asian. It wasn't until I came to America that I'd say I'm Asian. People would say, "No, you're not," because the lack of I don't know. I feel like there's a real lack of study of geography in this country that people would just not understand that, yes, I'm from Asia. So I have felt so often in the American theater ignored or erased. We're just not there. And I never felt like theaters champion our playwrights from our community. And you get to a point in your career. For me, it was this moment where I was like, you know what, we can't wait for other people to champion us. I'm going to just do the work and champion those playwrights and get their work up folks like Hannah Khalil, who's next on our roster, and we're going to be doing her play. When I read scenes, I just thought it was the most powerful, beautiful play that, it's not easy to effectively deal with an issue like occupation. How do you deal with that effectively in a play? And Hannah was telling me that she often got the criticism from her own Palestinian community saying, it needs more violence. And she would try to explain that doesn't translate well on stage. And I think that when you see this play and you see these little moments, and there's so much violence in them, but in a psychological violence. For example, that moment at the picnic when the three women are trying to have a picnic and the soldiers are constantly harassing them. And it's so, there's a passive aggressiveness to it, like, oh, hi, you're having a picnic, can we check your bags? And then they come back because that scene repeats. They come back again, can we check your bags again? I'm not Palestinian, I'm Pakistani, and I can tell you, I know what racial profiling feels like. Just as a Muslim woman who wears a hijab and who travels a lot, I've been through that, and it is awful. I actually remember a moment when I was in Siena, Italy. I travel a lot on my own just I organize writing retreats for myself as a playwright, and I had decided to go to Italy. And I'm in Siena and walking around. It was so beautiful. Two undercover cops stopped me and asked about my passport. What country are you from? Why are you here? And it was bothering them so much that I was here. And as soon as I said United States, they totally laughed and relaxed and felt better about their discrimination. And I rushed to my hotel, spent the rest of the evening in my hotel because it shook me and it was just so ugly. And I think for a lot of folks that don't experience racial profiling, they don't understand how psychologically harmful it is.
You were TW. You were traveling while Muslim.
Yeah, traveling while Muslim. Ronnie, talk to me about our next project, Hannah's Play Scenes, and what it means to you as a Palestinian.
Well, just the whole idea of Medina Theater Collective to me, it just rang out. The only thing I kept thinking about, and this has been kind of like a mantra for me for the past several years, is I took a nod actually from, I gleaned a lot from the African American community, from the term or the brand logo FUBU, for us, by us. And I feel like when we do come together as a group of people who aren't hearing our voices spoken and stories, that we do need to take the reins and just create our own. And once that body of work stands on its own, it will be available to the rest of the world. But at first, we need to really come together and do that on our own. Because, the truth is, especially in America, there are a lot of gatekeepers. And I don't think it's a secret that those gatekeepers are predominantly of one particular kind, and I'm almost to a point where it's like I'm really just tired of saying white, black, brown, all of these things. And I say that only because that's a very important issue in America. But when you travel a lot of the world, there's a different depth to all of that. And so, like you kind of pointed out, it's very superficial to simply consider everybody to be a monolith or homogenize everybody. And so when you called me about putting this together and said specifically that I want to hear the Palestinian voices. Why are all of these plays being canceled? Why are all of these artists, whether they're photographers, theater playwrights, or musicians for that matter, they're finding such opposition because, and when you find that opposition, it's not because somebody doesn't innately hate you or doesn't like you. It's because they don't want you to tell the truth. They don't want you to tell the stories of what is happening to them, and for people in the world to understand their experience. It's kind of like for the longest time in the African American community where everybody's being told to, oh, wait, wait. And much like what Malcolm X said about, the white liberal, watch out for people like that keep you very close because they want you to speak through their filter. And for us to remove that filter, we need to create our own works. And I find that by doing so with a play like Scenes, It's almost like the ambassador flagship play of the Palestinian story, because scenes from 73 years, what it means is it commemorates the Nakba, and the Nakba in Arabic translates to the catastrophe. And what all Palestinians around the world consider to be the catastrophe is in 1948, when they were displaced as indigenous people living in the land of what is called Israel right now, and many in the West Bank, the occupied West Bank. It's a military occupation by the Israeli government, and in Gaza. And all throughout the Holy Land where Palestinians lived, uh, once the Zionist entity came from Europe, uh, this is European settler colonialism, because Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived in Palestine together. They lived in my grandparents' building in West Jerusalem, which is predominantly Jewish now, and the whole thing about it is that this was a land with a people that had sophisticated culture, that had an airports, not an airport, airports, that had vehicles, that had access to technology, and was importing and exporting things all throughout the world, and they were an integral part. If it were without a people, then what were the English doing there for so long? If it were a land without a people, what were the Ottomans doing there for so long? Who were they governing? This is a land where my grandparents are buried for over 10 centuries, you know?
Mhm.
And the thing is, as indigenous people to this land, we need this story to be told. And right now, I find that around the entire world, there's such a momentum for people to get the truth about indigenous cultures, to get the truth about what the transatlantic slave trade was in America. Who were these people that came from sophisticated cultures? That's the thing. And it's very easy to justify colonialism, to justify settler colonialism and the such and the way that people do it is by discrediting or taking down the other. And I think what this play does, especially Scenes from 73, is it humanizes us. And that is the missing component often, is that humanization, because it's very easy to hate or justify war against the people that you otherize. I mean, on my way here today, I was just listening about we've heard the term driving while black. Well, they were talking about biking while black, walking while black. And what happened to you? You were walking while Muslim. The same thing in Italy. I get the same thing when I walk around in certain places as well. And sometimes it's too superficial based on the color of your skin, but more often than not, it's usually based on ignorance.
Mhm.
Ignorance that leads to fear, and that fear that leads to violence. When in fact, somebody can just sit down, read a play, accept your story, whether they agree with it or not, and then at least begin to understand you rather than otherize you. And I feel that that's what this play does. And incidentally, almost every single one of the stories, the vignettes that exist in this play, come from a place of truth. These are stories I've heard from collectively from Palestinians, things I've seen with my own eyes, as well as things I've actually witnessed when I travel there. And so that's what the play really means to me, and to have it um, written by somebody like Hannah Khalil, who is part Irish and part Palestinian, uh, from two cultures that have historically been oppressed, and ironically by the same oppressor, the English, or European colonialism. And to have her put it out there, and then to have somebody like Najla Said, daughter of the renowned Palestinian scholar Edward Said, who championed Orientalism. In fact, that's what he called it and termed it in academia, that people would begin to understand what it means to otherize the other. And this
Yeah.
was something much like what Martin Luther King did, wasn't just for people of Black heritage, but for everybody. And I feel that that's what he did. And I feel that the story of the Nakba, the story of the Palestinian people, and particularly the one that Hannah is trying to tell, is not only the story of the Palestinian people, but it is a story of justice, a struggle for justice, and a struggle for human rights.
I want to talk a little bit now about the Shroud Maker, because that's another play that we're planning to do. It's been pushed to October due to COVID, but we are partnering with International Voices Project and the South Asian Institute to do two performances of this beautiful play. And Annalise, you've read it and you will be playing the Shroud Maker. Can you talk to us a little bit about two things. What does Medina Theater Collective mean to you, and your reflections on the Shroud Maker?
It's funny because when when we were doing introductions, I didn't want to mention that play because I realized I have this, which links to something I'm going to talk about right now. I have this fear like it's not going to happen, which is based in, I think, trauma. Because when it got postponed, I realized I had this sinking feeling like, oh my gosh, we're not going to get to do it. I can just see, which is not the case. It is going to happen. I know, because the theater company is committed to it, but it links to this idea that I've been thinking about a lot this week, and why the theater company means so much to me personally, about invisibility. I come from, and it means a lot to me. I want to say too, that as Ronnie was saying, that Hannah Khalil is part Irish also, because I've grown up a little bit with this imposter syndrome that like, I don't have a right to claim my Palestinian culture because my family was such a mishmash, and a lot of had a very dramatic childhood. There was definitely troubled times in it. So a lot of things to sort of sort out, and a lot of cultures clashing together. But on top of that, as I started to want to claim my Palestinian culture and be part of the community, I've found that a number of things working against me. One is my father's, what I didn't understand as a child, but would term as, and in early adulthood termed as, an immigrant perspective of, don't call attention to yourself. You don't call attention to yourself, keep your head down. Then came to understand later that that is also a legacy of trauma. Like, when you poke your head up, you get smashed down. So don't do that. As a child, I interpreted that as him being critical of me for being an American. But I understand there are so many more layers to that now. So there's this sort of internalized generational trauma of, keep your head down if you know what's good for you. Playing against this cultural, in the States, I was just telling someone this story that I had completely forgotten about until recently. And it's this: I used to do freelance work, for a corporate training company that used actors to work on, we would write custom plays on issues like diversity or sexual harassment, and then use improvisation with that to do training in corporate environment. So I went to a number of these diversity trainings, to just sort of see what was out there. And I went to one that was led by a very well-known and well-respected company, that was led by a couple. She was white, her partner was Black, and she was very involved in the civil rights movement in the 60s. Her partner wasn't there. This was just her doing this. And we're in an auditorium, and there's several hundred people there. And she starts the whole thing off with this exercise, which she would basically call out certain ethnic groups or races or kind of life situations, like all the single parents stand up, and people would stand up, and then she'd be like, sit down. Okay, everyone who's Black, stand up. People would stand up, sit down. She kept doing this. And I think the exercise was meant to both show a kind of intersectionality, and also maybe to challenge people's preconceived notions of who someone was, right? And I'm sitting there the whole time, like just waiting for her to say me, like say, I don't know, Middle Eastern. I didn't expect anyone to say Palestinian, but like Middle Eastern, no. She went through, I can't even tell you how many permutations of things, and then ended the exercise and was about to go on. And I was like, excuse me. And, she was stunned. I said, you didn't say me. And she said, well, what's you? And I said, you didn't say Middle Eastern or any permutation of Middle Eastern. Like, that's a huge category to leave out. And this was probably 15 or 20 years ago. And it was so interesting because not only did she not apologize for it, she was just kind of like, oh. And then she could have just said that and let me stand up, right? But she didn't. She just sort of went on. And it reinforced that idea. I remember feeling like I wanted to cry, and then feeling stupid for wanting to cry. Like, what, like, just get a grip. It's just a stupid exercise. But it's not, it's not. Um, I think that feeling of being, of wanting, of feeling like people want you to be erased somehow, that you don't, not only do you not matter, but just don't exist, don't even exist, um, is, it's so painful, and it's so much in the past year. I agree. I think the last year has been just horrific on so many fronts and so painful. And so I feel like we've all been sort of turned inside out, with the pain and the trauma and the upset and the, God, I mean, I could just cry thinking about it right now. But I also feel like it is, and it's the perfect time for the theater company to come on the heels of all of this, because I do feel underneath all of the pain a great hope. I feel like I can feel this seismic shift. We're just at the beginning of it, um in the broader context. People obviously have been doing work on these issues for just years and years, unbelievable work. But I feel hope, and I feel like the theater collective is an embodiment of that hope for me. um so it's very important, to me personally, and also to just be connected to other artists in a way that, you know the other thing I hadn't thought about in a long time is that I've had this experience so many times in my life, and I just had it recently. It comes in different forms. But one of the forms that it used to take when I was younger is that people would say to me things like, you have such a great tan. And it was so puzzling. I'm like, it's not a tan. And why would you assume it's a tan? Like, it was such a weird thing to me. I think, why are they assuming it's a tan? And someone also just said to me, and this is someone I care about deeply, who is you know, a good person, somebody who's really working to be, to expand their horizons. But he said to me, I was talking about a situation I was in, and he said, and I said, I don't understand what was happening in this group. And I was trying to figure out why this certain kind of energy was being directed at me. And I said, I don't know, maybe it was because I'm the only person of color in that group. And he said, well, I hope you'll forgive me for saying this, but you don't read as a person of color. And I
Mm.
thought, what?
You don't look like the person of color that I imagine people of color.
Right. I was like, what does that even mean? I don't even understand. And then it does this sort of complicated thing internally for me, because I think, am I somehow sending out a message that shuns my people? Do you know what I mean? Am I doing something? But I think partially when people say something like that, what they're actually saying is, they're saying, I relate to you, I like you, therefore you are like me. And I am not a person of color, so you are not a person of color, you know? And it's
Yeah.
like so fascinating how that goes that way, but doesn't seem to come back the other way. It's like my college roommate saying to me, she had made some, before she met my family, she had made like a kind of a racist joke to me. And I knew that she was coming to my house before we moved into the dorm together because we'd met at the audition to get into the school. And I hadn't told her that my stepfather was Black. And I was like, okay, let's see. And when she showed up at my house, she was, and she was, I could tell she didn't know how to process what she was seeing, like when he opened the door. And I was just waiting for her after she had made that comment. I thought, is she going to say something now? Is she going to apologize? And she waited a couple of days. And my stepfather was the most loving, big hearted, everyone adored him. He's just the kind of person who, hugged everybody and just, so he immediately loved her. And I could tell that she immediately felt crappy for what she had said. But the way that she justified it was a couple of days later, in a moment we were in a room, she goes, I just love your stepfather. And I said, I know, I love him too. He is an excellent human being. And she said, yeah, just can't even believe, I can't even, she said, yeah, it's like there are Black people and then there are, I don't even want to use the term that she used. And she said, and your stepfather is a Black person. And I said, I know exactly what you mean because there are white people and then there are assholes. So I know the difference also,
Yeah.
you know, but just that you would take it as this person is the exception, not this person is the rule. It's crazy. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent here.
No,
But
that
but I but the reason, so that's the reason that Shroudmaker is so already, so I can feel that oh my gosh, that when we start working on it, it's going to be, I just got to be ready because I can feel it already. I can feel like the ground shifting underneath that, those, because it is a one woman show, but encapsulated in that show are many stories, or stories. I think of them as like, kind of books in a series. It's all her life, but they each have a certain perspective that is critical. And
yeah.
it's very moving. And it's
And it's
both,
funny too.
it's
Very
funny. It's just beautiful. It really is. And I think it is that. I liked what Ronnie was saying about, we have to tell our stories. And you've said this too, Rohina. I know that was the impetus for the company, that we have to tell our stories, and that it is in telling those stories. I don't understand how this magic thing works, but it is true that the specific becomes the universal. I don't know why. The more specific it is, the more universal it is. And I've had that experience numerous times when I've told stories about my father. And for years I didn't, because I thought nobody wants to hear about my weird childhood with all the, like, who's going to relate to that? Who's going to relate to all these intersecting things and the trauma and the right? But it never fails that when I've told those stories and just been, just like you were saying, Ronnie, just tell the truth to the best of your ability. Just tell the truth as specifically as you can tell it. And all kinds of people would come up to me afterwards and say, I didn't have those circumstances, but I relate to your relationship with your father, or I relate to the pain of this thing, or so I'm so excited to have a venue for us to tell those stories. And I think the Shroud Maker in particular, I do. You said, Rohina, when you sent it to me, you were like, this is going to change your life. And I feel it already.
You
So
know,
I'm
Oh,
grateful.
I
have
can.
you read it yet, Ronnie?
I did not read that one yet because I'm busy with scenes right now.
Okay.
I can relate to you tremendously, Annalise, because my wife is Polish and my children are Polish Palestinian.
That's
Oh,
right. We did talk about that.
My uncle even jokes and says, "So your kids are Polish-Tinian?" I do completely agree also with, I grew up in an area that was in the southwest suburbs just outside of Chicago. And, this area, not to get into politics about it, but let's just say it's a very conservative area. Okay. And I mean conservative in terms of like Republican conservative area. And I didn't understand many of the epithets that were hurled at me growing up, uh, and because I was too young, first of all, from the not innocuous, but from the subtle ones like camel jockey or other things, but almost on a daily basis, and I am not exaggerating you, the N word with sand in front of it.
Yeah.
Very often. That was almost on a daily basis. No joke. Still, that I couldn't really process either until you start to reflect on it even much later. And you realize that this is the perception, how you were perceived when you are trying to not be white or not be black or brown, just be a person. You're trying to be a human being. I remember that moment really taking a grasp when I was taking guitar lessons at a music shop. And this was an area where, for example, the N word was thrown around like it was water, like it was nothing. I distinctly remember in the 80s when the mayor of the village proclaimed publicly how he was proud that he did not allow black families to move into the village. And when the first one moved in, I actually befriended the boy because he was in my class. And I did not see him as black, white, brown, whatever either, just because I was just grew up with this notion that we were mixed with everybody here, in America. But there is one point that I would like to make that probably is relevant to all of this is that my grandmother, did barely spoke any English, right? I mean, they came from Palestine, but they really held on to their culture. And I grew up with my grandparents. And when we would talk about people or friends or neighbors, like, oh, that person there is Yugoslavian, or that person there is Mexican or black or whatever. But then when it came to describing white people, she'd say, oh, the Americans. She's like, we don't want any Americans. Don't hang out with the Americans. And I didn't take that to mean black, Mexican, or anything else. She knew what she was talking about because that's her understanding when she came to this country, what they made her understand. And many years, fast forward many years, I started teaching in Inglewood at a high school that's in predominantly African American community in the south side of Chicago, and this amazing high school. And they were teaching Arabic and Mandarin there, and I was working with a choir, and we were studying. They had questions. We were trying to study culture through my background in ethnomusicology, and we were studying cultures through music, through the lens of music. And one thing that was on the minds of many of these students who were studying Arabic, Syria happened to be in the news quite often, and Ferguson had happened at the same time that there were bombings happening in Gaza, and they saw this kind of strange solidarity where people in Gaza were giving people in Ferguson advice on how to deal with tear gas, because the same tactics that were being used on black folks there were the ones being used on people in Gaza. And we're talking about this, and one of the issues that we came up with, the topics we discussed, was propaganda. And we talked about how if I said to them, I'm going to say two words to you and you tell me the first word that comes to your mind. I said Arab, Muslim. And there was hesitation, but inevitably the word came out. Many of the students were like, oh, terrorist. I said, now I want you to tell me why do you think that word is. And many of them came back with really good responses, things like the news, the media. I said, now I'm going to say black, and you tell me what comes out. And they had to hesitate and stop for a moment, but many of them knew what I was asking. They said criminal, thug, blah blah blah. I said, these are linguistics. This is linguistics. These are terms that are used to make you look at yourself the way they want you to see yourself, which led then to an entire discussion and unit on minstrelsy. And I told them, minstrelsy, do you know what that is? And almost none of the class knew it. That was the most heartbreaking moment, because if you didn't know your history, because it's not being taught to you, then how do you know when you're actually a victim of this prejudice? And I said, that is the intersectionality between not just black, but brown and other people as well, that we need to start to understand our history. So we need to tell these stories ourselves, by ourselves, on our own, and uncover these nuggets that we hear from our grandparents, from testimony, not from a Western or Eurocentric book written by a white scholar. This is testimony that's in our history. And I mean, that was an entire unit which led me to then also want to write a play about, the I was approached by Silk Road Rising Theater at one point, and they paired me with an exceptional playwright, Reginald Edmond, who heads up an amazing organization called Black Words, Black Lives, Black Words, and we came together to try to tell a story of Islam in America, and that the first Muslims to come to America were enslaved people. Up to 30% of the enslaved people were Muslim, but the religion wasn't as important to me of a factor as much as it was to dispel a misconceived notion that these were illiterate people, savages, etc., etc., when in fact, by virtue of the fact they were Muslim, they actually read and wrote Arabic, so they were quite literate. They spoke multiple languages because it wasn't only the language of where they were from. They may have spoken Mandingo, Fulla, a variety of different languages to exist in Africa, which has only, 4,000 languages. And incidentally is a continent, you know and these are, I know, little things that maybe we might understand, but it astonished me to see how the general public had no idea of many of these things. And it is up to us, it's incumbent upon us to really create space for these stories to be told, for history to be corrected, uh, and that's why I'm thrilled to be in such company like this, to be able to do that, and to be able to help other generations to understand the importance of story.
I want to add something to that, Ronnie. I'm so glad you said that, because one of the one of the issues for me personally, and I've seen it play out in other uh, people I know that are from other cultures too, but especially in my family, is that for the Palestinians, um, the the history of the trauma, which is generational, um, created in my father an unwillingness to talk specifics about how he grew up and what had happened in the past. I mean, my father left. He went to South America first. He ended up at NYU. He met my mother, and he stayed, here in the States. But I have family, still on the West Bank. And but because of that like engendered trauma, he wouldn't talk about some of these things. So this, for me, these stories are important. I want to be educated on these. I want to hear these stories from the elders, because I wasn't able to get them because my father wasn't able to talk about it. And I've heard similar things. I have a friend who is a trauma specialist and also a voice teacher, and she talks about how uh, her mother-in-law is a Holocaust survivor, and how she also does not talk about it, like a lot of people don't, but that the legacy of that is passed down nonetheless, whether you speak of it or not. And so what happens is you have these things that you're responding to and reacting to, just like you were saying, Ronnie. If you don't know the history, you don't even know what it is you're reacting to. You think it's something I'll just speak for myself. As a child, I thought it was about me, that it was personal, I didn't understand there was a cultural framework for it, that there was a history, that there was so I feel like those stories are important to be told, not only for those, let's say, outside our community, but for within our community. I'm hungry for those stories. I want them.
Absolutely, I agree.
And I also feel that, you know, if there's one community in the United States and in England that when it comes to the theater gets pulled out of seasons and have their plays canceled, it is the Palestinian community. And we see it again and again and again in the United States. When I connected with Ahmad Massoud, who wrote The Shroud Maker, and he told me how much of his work has been canceled in England. And it's outrageous. And what so many Palestinian artists have expressed to me is that we are denied the right to have a narrative. So, on one hand, you're talking about your father, and that trauma that silenced him. And then when there's folks who want to talk about what's happening, again, they get silenced. And in February 2020, right before the pandemic, I went there. I went to Palestine and I saw it with my own eyes. And when you see it, you can't unsee it. And I just knew that my journey as an artist had led me for the last 10 years collaborating with so many different theaters and artists. And now all those connections I've made, it's not about me and my work, because the last 10 years have been about me fighting to get my work on stage. And honestly, as a Pakistani, never worrying that someone's going to pull it out of a season and cancel it. That was never a fear of mine. And but the Palestinian artist, that is a constant fear. And I just felt like all these connections I've made, now is the time where it's not about me anymore. It's about uplifting others in my community, especially focusing on the Palestinian community, because that is the one community that is constantly being silenced. And for those people that like to say, well, we're in America and we have our own problems, and that's over there, and we don't need to worry about what's over there because we have our own problems in the United States dealing with racism. Well, to that I say, we as taxpayers pump so much money into that conflict that it is our business. And the American theater should not be shunning stories about this conflict, especially when we are paying for it. So if you pay tax money, you are complicit. And this is why it has to be something that the American theater is dealing with instead of silencing. So that's why it became really important. And I just want to say, when I read The Shroud Maker, wow, we hear so much about Gaza, and it's this place where there's been bombed so much white phosphorus on the people of Gaza, and all these horror stories. And yet to find someone like Ahmed, born and raised in Gaza, who writes with such humanity, who writes with such humor. I mean, the work is so freaking funny. And then all of a sudden you are sobbing. That is an artist. And to think that his work is not known all over the United States is shameful.
You know,
To think that his work has been silenced is shameful. Yes, Ronnie.
I was going to say that, it's ironic. So many Palestinians I know, especially from there, especially from Gaza, the majority of my friends from there, not because I'm a musician, are artists. And it's funny because it seems to me that under such pressure, under such scrutiny, under such oppression, that the only thing you can do is at the very least express yourself. That's the only power you truly have. Why are the Black arts probably the most profound arts? They are American culture. Black music is American music. That's pretty much it. The arts of Black people in America and throughout the world. Why are they so pervasive? Because they're a culture that suffered so much. The more you suffer, obviously, I know it's a cliche and it's a dodge, but you rely on your expression and that expression of truth to get it out there. But the main reason, Rohina, the main reason that people are afraid and canceling and let's just be blunt about it, that Zionist groups are pressuring institutions to cancel these plays, because that's why they're getting canceled. Right. It's not the white gatekeepers sitting at on top and saying, oh, I don't like that play. It's because they're being pressured for money being pulled from them, for them being called out as anti-Semitic, et cetera, because they simply don't want the truth to come out. And when the truth comes out, what happens is people in the world will use their eyes and realize that this is apartheid. They will realize this is racism and apartheid. The thing that others don't understand too, the narrative that they have swallowed, is this. The people who are Palestinian, living in Palestine and Israel in this region, they're not a monolith. And they're not all Arab. Armenians, after their genocide, sought refuge in mass, en masse in Palestine. There's an entire Armenian quarter in Jerusalem. There's an entire Moroccan quarter in Jerusalem. There is an entire Black community all throughout Palestine. Jericho has a huge Black community. Jerusalem has an entire neighborhood that was practically given to the Black community to live there. So there are Black Palestinians, there are white Palestinians, there are brown Palestinians, there are Armenian Palestinians, Moroccan Palestinians, Jewish, Christian, Druze Baha'i, the first Baha'i temple to be built outside of Iran was in Akka in Palestine.
Wow.
So this is a cosmopolitan area that does not belong to one religious group that wants to dictate it as some kind of ethnocracy, because that's what it's called. It's an ethnocracy. You
Mhm.
can't say that there's a Jewish character to this country and then literally put into the constitution, similar to the Chinese exclusion law here, that the only people that have rights are people who are Jewish. Then you've just, even your own citizens, you've canceled them. That is why these plays are being canceled. That is why we didn't hear so much the narrative of Black people in America before throughout the 20th century. That is why we don't hear the stories of indigenous people throughout this, because when the truth comes out, people will begin to understand and they will start to take action. And that's what's happening right now. We are
Mhm.
taking action on all of this stuff. And we're not doing it in a violent way. Somebody had said, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, they said people in America should be thankful that Black people are not seeking revenge, they're seeking justice.
Kimberly Jones, I love her.
Exactly. And, you know, th- that is universal. That is not just here. That is why and speaking of Kimberly Jones, Kimberly Crenshaw, about intersectionality. We all collectively need to understand that this is a topic of intersectionality. This is a topic of that is universal. It may have started with one's own culture, be you brown, black, Muslim, whatever it might be, but then you start to recognize the universal truths that exist in that, and that's what binds us all together. I long for the day that we can express ourselves through our cultures, not because we have justice work to do, but rather we can celebrate the beauty of these cultures.
Mhm.
That's right. And our time is wrapping up. Um, but this has been such a beautiful conversation, and I am so excited for the work that's coming up for us, upcoming with Hannah Khalil's play, and then followed by The Shroud Maker. And it was heartbreaking when that got postponed because of COVID, because it was going to happen in June, and there are COVID fears that we're not out of the pandemic yet, and we want to do a live performance. Um, but we are going to do the work, and we're committed to it, and we're committed to this incredible playwright, Ahmed Masood. And I just want to let you both just end with some final thoughts of anything to wrap up with that's on your mind.
Boy, Annalise.
Yeah. My gosh, I have so many thoughts about everything. I think just to reiterate the fact that I do feel so much hope underneath everything, underneath all the devastation, which the devastation is necessary, horrific, and painful, but you have to have that. You have to, what is it that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house? Audre Lorde, like you have to have that devastation in order to build better. And we're definitely in that. It's in days when I get overwhelmed by the things that I read, and I mean, again, I just feel teary just thinking about how much pain is circulating right now in the world, is surfaced in the world. It's always been there. It's not new. Um, but underneath it, I do feel so much hope, and I'm so grateful to know the two of you and to have this opportunity to chat and then to work together with all the artists in our collective, and and be just on the cusp of this, beautiful bringing of these stories into the world. So thank you. And thank you, Rohina, for putting the company together. And I remember the first time, I'll just say this, my parting thought. The first time I met you, you saw me in a show at Silk Road, and you waited in the lobby. And I remember you kind of like accosted me, and you said, you were like, "You're Palestinian." And I said, "Yes, I am." And you're like, "Are you a writer? You need to write a play." And I said, oh, I am a writer. And she said, I'm going to do whatever I can to help you, to support your work. It's such a beautiful spirit, and grateful that you've come into my life too. So
Uh,
And I just want to say one thing real quick about I had the second shot of my vaccine, and I felt like I had been hit by a bus. It was bad, and I was in bed all day. And what got me through it was Googling you, Annalise, and your stories on the moth. Folks who are listening to this interview, Google her name, go to the moth, go to YouTube. I watched three stories and I was so sick, but I was laughing so hard. You raised my spirits up. You are hilarious. Your stories are so well written. Girl, you need to write a one woman show just about your life. I'm serious. I will help you.
thank you.
But you brightened my day when I was really at my weakest. So, power of art. It's the power of art. And Ronnie, give us your final thoughts. And I'm wondering, if possible, I just want to share with the world your beautiful talent. Could you sing something? Do you have a oud close by? Could you end us with a song after your final thought?
well, my final thoughts are very much in line with what Annalise was saying, which is I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of renewed hope. First of all, I have no choice. I have two children, so I have no choice but to have hope. But I have hope even more so because I feel like last year, 2020, with all of its trauma and disaster, etc. I mean, I was on tour with a Broadway musical that got just canceled. I went from being a very active freelance artist and working a lot of things to putting my all my eggs in this basket, and then it gets canceled all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden, all of the social justice issues in the country surface. It was a powder keg, right? We know that this was going to happen soon, but I felt like we were living this watershed moment. And this watershed moment wasn't only specific to Minneapolis or to Louisville, Kentucky, or to America. It was for the world around. And for the first time, all of a sudden, I noticed it just in my circles alone about Palestinian stories, about Palestinian people, that all of a sudden, I think it was just a couple of weeks ago, a congresswoman proposed a bill to scrutinize and limit the amount of money, the tune of $3.6 billion that we send to Israel, to be scrutinized because it's being used to incarcerate youth, being used to steal land, being used to oppress the Palestinian people and destroy them with chemical weapons and of all forms of atrocious apartheid, you can say. But the thing that's giving me more hope about that is not the destruction. I mean, just Jerusalem, the beloved city of my family. Yesterday, there were mobs of right-wing religious Zionist extremists walking the street chanting, "Death to Arabs, death to Arabs." Can you imagine us going through the street and chanting something like that? You know, so I think that the day of reckoning is upon us, and that the entire world is going to need to see that we need to work together. We need to have less hate. We need to channel that anger and frustration into things that are productive, because the truth is that 5, 10 years now, right now, not just 5 or 10 years from now, but right now, there are far greater issues that we're going to need our collective body of humanity to deal with than just how I see you, what color are you. There are things, climate, water, renewable source energy sources. We need all the brightest minds to come together to do this, just as they have in the past. So I'm very hopeful, because this is what I'm ingraining into my children. I think this is what people are finding now in schools. I'm very grateful for things like the 1619 Project, which introduces real African American history. I'm happy to see that Asian American history is now going to be included into curriculums. And the more we learn about each other at a younger age, the more that the youth can also challenge the elders in the society who want to hold on to the old way, and tell them, no, that's not right. The way you're looking at this, let's just move on from this, because this needs to resolve itself. But this is my
Something hopeful, something hopeful.
hopeful. Okay.
so beautiful. Thank you, Ronnie.
You,
Thank you
Rohina.
to Regina Taylor for organizing this, letting us be a part of her amazing initiative. And Annalise, Ronnie, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been such a great conversation.
It has.
Um, we're going to do great work. And I have children too, Ronnie. We've got to be hopeful, and things will get better. And we do our part, and we are artists, and we do the work. And I believe in God, and I know that things will get better.
I agree.
So,
I want
so
to thank you also to Regina, and thank you, Shangela, and everybody on this project. It's awesome. But Rohina, again, too, just as Annalise said, thank you so much for your tenacity and your courage to do this and to do these things. And together we are stronger.
that's right. That's right. All right, you guys, thank you. This was so wonderful. Oh, Ronnie, I didn't give you a chance to introduce what is the instrument you just played. Can you just let the audience know that?
This instrument is called al-oud, which is the predecessor to the European lute, and the lute gets its name from al-oud. And what became the European lute later is the guitar. So this is the great great grandfather of the guitar that originated in Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq.
Wonderful. Thank
Beautiful.
you.
It was
Thank you.
beautiful.
All right, guys. This
Yeah,
has been
it
wonderful.
has. It has